A real pleasure for me to welcome Nick Meikle, a celebrated former Rhodesian Air Force and South African Air Force pilot. Um, thanks, Nick. I know it took a bit of persuasion, but really appreciate you giving us your time today.
Pleasure, Hannes.
Nick, are you part of the Meikle's clan, the Thomas Meikle story? Where do you fit in with the
Uh,
Meikles?
in the Meikles, yeah. Hannes, we're not. My father came out to Rhodesia in 1950 to farm
Okay.
for quite a well-known farmer in the Blanket area called Mr. Ewing, who at one time had been the biggest tobacco farmer in the world. But Dad's family, or our Meikle family, originating from Scotland,
Yes.
are not related at all to Thomas Meikle's
Oh, okay.
family.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
came. So you came later.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And what brought your dad to Rhodesia?
I think it was the weather. Eh? He'd grown tired of the poor weather in the UK. He'd just finished his national service um, in the famous Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders in the British Army after the war. And yeah, he just wanted to move on. So he'd secured a job to be an assistant farmer, assistant manager on a farm, which then became the family farm um, in just north of Blanket, between Blanket and Sonoya in those days, or Blanket and Chinoy now.
Okay. And Nick, so you were born where? In Salisbury?
Salisbury, yeah, 1953, April, yeah.
And then went to school where?
Started off at Lilfordia, can you believe it? It was already going in those days under Mrs. Hall, who I think was the sister of Old Man Lilford, if I remember correctly. And then from there, I moved on after a couple of years, moved on to Eagle up in the Woomba, that lovely private school up there. And then after some 5 years there, moved on to Falcon down at Essex Vale, where I finished off my secondary schooling there.
So you finished school and then went to university.
Yep, yep, off to uni to Maritzburg. Yeah, I think Dad was just keen to try and finish off my education before I guess you got plunged into the war in Rhodesia, because I think all of us were heading that way eventually. So yeah, I was there from 71 to 73. I finished off a degree.
What did
And
you do?
then I majored in history. Eh? That was my, yeah, in economic history, and did other subjects. So it was, yeah, a BA, Bachelor of Arts.
Okay. Yeah. And then back to Rhodesia. And did you start off with the national service or did you sign on?
Um, yeah, I had, whilst I was at uni, I managed to get my PPL at Charles Prince there through Tech Air. That was in 72, December to January. And then I was now bitten by the flying bug. So, yeah, once I finished uni, then I had to decide whether to join or what to do. So, after much soul searching, I settled on the Air Force and, yeah, joined in January of 1974.
And who were some of the guys on your course, Nick, that you remember?
I was on 28 PTC Hannes. So a large course for that time, because most courses were small. I think it was probably the first of the larger courses. Um, and out of 21, 8 of us graduated eventually. But some of the names on that course include um, Leon Duplessis, a good friend of mine, who sadly was lost in action, and whose father was captain of the second Viscount.
That's right.
So a double tragedy for that family. Ray Bolton was on my course. Mark Dawson was on my course. Mark Vernon, um, Bill Mickey, and Daryl Spons. Yeah, I think that's what the lot. And then we had a couple of guys who also tagged on, were already commissioned in the Air Force. One of them was Starry Stevens. He'd been the navigator on the Canberras and joined us to do his flying training with us. He sadly lost his life not that long after in a Lynx when he got shot down. Yeah, so those were our course mates.
And so you got your wings mid 75.
Yes, August the 15th, 75. Yeah, we were lucky enough to get our Prime Minister, Ian Smith, he came to present our wings. Yeah, quite a big day in the guys' lives.
A big day, I'm sure. And then where were you posted to, Nick?
All of us stayed behind at Thornhill for the next few months to do a vampire weapons OCU. So that lasted until I think it was February of '76. So yeah, it was an interesting time. I think at that time, as obviously the war was quickly expanding, why all of us were put onto that jet conversion course, I'm not sure. But I guess having all qualified on the Vampire was a logical progression. But once we finished the jet conversion or the weapons conversion on the VAMP, which included doing some work on some flying on the single seat Vampires, which was rather fun. I got posted to 7 Squadron together with the youngest guy in our course, Mark Dawson. That was, I think, February of '76. I think it was a bit of an experiment at the time, if I remember correctly. Up till then, all the guys that was posted to 7 were generally had about 1,000 hours. But because there was obviously an increasing demand for crew, particularly on 7, they posted us two onto 7 as a bit of an experiment from what I remember, which I think we managed to cope with. And then, yeah, then after that, a number of graduates from successive courses all came onto 7 Squadron as first-time postings.
So your first operational deployment was to Op Hurricane, Mount Darwin.
Yes. Yeah, we did our conversion first to the Alouette 2 and then Alouette 3. That took us through to about May, I think it was '76. And then got posted out to Darwin, FAF 4, and straight into the heat of battle almost. Yeah.
Nick, so just talk us through, so mainly Fire Force work initially.
Yeah, I think being a youngster, you're obviously very wet behind the ears. So I joined a Fire Force there that was led by Rob McGregor, who'd been one of our instructors, and yeah, we were thrown almost into the deep end really, because not only were you part of a Fire Force when you were called out, but you were doing numerous tasks. They could be changing relays on the OPs and so on, or higher points around Darwin. Another one was doing Casevacs. And there were 2 memorable Casevacs that we had to do. I was with another fellow, Danny Svoboda, who'd previously been on 1 Squadron, and he'd been on the same conversion as myself. And another colleague, Chris Whitworth, a good friend, and also living here in Australia. So Danny and I went out to one of those Casevacs. I think another one included a bus that got hit a landmine, so yeah, huge amounts of casualties. And we were thrown literally right into Casevacing all these poor victims to a local hospital, the Coranda Mission Hospital. And that was it. Yeah, we were straight into it at Darwin.
And which of the RLI commandos did you work with? Did you work with most of them? Which RLI officers were involved at the time?
Yeah, we were the Fire Force base. Their work was working when we were there was the 3 Commando, and yes, we just progressively worked as you worked your way around the country on subsequent tours. We worked with different commandos. So initially 3 Commando. I can't remember offhand who was officer commanding at the time, but yeah, we started off with 3 Commando and subsequently 2 Commando with Johnny Dawson, and a few names come to mind like Joe Deploy and so on. Yeah, so we progressively, as you moved around the country, worked with different commandos, but they were the first 2 commanders that I was exposed to and worked with. Great guys.
Nick, did you stay on the G car, or did you do any K car flying?
Hannes, going through my logbook, yeah, it looks like we spent quite a bit of time on the G car. It wasn't until 1977 that I see that I did top cover work and worked on the K car. But you seem to flip flop. Sometimes you were doing G car work, sometimes you were doing K car work. But there were obviously a lot of guys more senior and very experienced and very capable K car drivers, and therefore leaders of the various fire forces that were around. So it seemed to be just a progressive thing. As you got more experience, you seem to find yourself on the Keiko. Yeah.
Nick, I know you were involved in that big contact in the Hondi Valley. I think that was initiated by one of the independent companies, if my memory serves me. I don't know. Can you just talk us through those events? I know that was a big punch up.
Yes, it was. Hill 31, as they called it. Still not sure why they called it Hill 31, but a very prominent gomo at the top end of the sort of southwest end of the Hondi Valley. On the left, if you were driving out of the Hondi Valley, it would be on the left-hand side. There's a couple of pictures, I think, in Chris Cox's book, RhAirForce. There's a picture of the contact, because Chris was on that one. We'd positioned, the RhAirForce had been positioned up at a place called Mutasa, which was a DC's camp up at the high ground along the main road up to Inyanga. I think they must have been anticipating something. But we'd been positioned there for a couple of days with 3 Commando. Kipper Donald was the acting officer commanding. I think he could have been still a captain at that point. But the RhAirForce was positioned up there, and then we got the call out on the 15th of November. And down we went early in the morning into the Hondi Valley. And a significant punch-up occurred. It lasted the whole day, and I think we were still doing work the following day. But the main contact lasted for the whole of that particular day, the 15th. I think for RR, that's Colonel Peter Brown. He was based at the time, Colourful Peter Brown. It was his company, or his regiment there that were, I think, had made initial contact or initial OP work.
Yeah.
I recall a large group, an armed group of 82, but then I see, looking through the records, it was a smaller group of about 40 odd that in actual fact was contacted. But by the end of the day, 31 of the CTs were accounted for, were killed, and we'd lost 1 troopie and a couple of other injuries. Yeah.
Must have been difficult flying in that rugged mountain country, Nick.
Most of the valley is sort of undulating, Hannes, but obviously, I think for the troopies, they're the ones who have to contend with, difficult terrain, bush ravines, significant gradient, and I don't think it was an easy contact with any of them. I think a lot of the kills were all short range work, but for us it wasn't too bad. We were generally putting down sticks around the area to contain the terrorists inside that area where they were obviously basically holed up or camping. Yeah, so it wasn't too bad.
And links, you put in some airstrikes.
Not myself. I was in a G car. There were Chris Wentworth was the K car commander with Kipper Donald. And I'm trying to remember their tech, Tony Merber, I think it was. And then there was Dude Thomas. He was the G car 1. I was G car 2, and Trevor Bainham was G car 2, both 3. Yeah. So we wouldn't have put down any strikes. We were just ferrying troops into the contact area as requested by Chris and or for Kipper Donald. Yeah.
Nick, were you involved in any of the big external raids, Chimoio, or were you at Chimoio?
Yes, I was. That was a whole year later. Can you believe it? Almost to the day. We were part of, I think, about 30 choppers that went into Chimoio. I was in one section of 10 choppers. There being 10 K cars and then two groups of G cars, 10 G cars. And I think we were assigned the role of doing Casevacs if that was required. Not that I remember doing any. But so I was involved with that, and then the subsequent raid onto Tembui up in Mozambique, there north of Cahora Bassa.
Did you go? So you went up to Tembui as well?
Yeah.
The next day. So that was a long haul in an Alouette, Nick.
It was a very long haul. We had to fly over Cahora Bassa all of us had that feeling, what are we going to do if we use an engine? Yeah, because you're going to go down pretty quickly. Anyway, obviously nothing as dramatic as that happened. But yeah, we had an admin area on the train inside Mozambique, if I recall correctly, where we would have gathered ourselves before launching. Yeah, that was a huge disappointment. I think there was hardly any terrorists at that camp, whereas obviously at Chimoio there'd been a lot of terrorists.
Nick, when you flew into Chimoio, where did you fly from? Where did you take off?
We operated out of that admin point was Lake Alexander.
Okay.
Yeah, and it was quite an impressive scene seeing all those choppers there. It was. I think you asked me whether I had any useful pictures. I actually got one. I found one photograph or a couple of photographs from that particular occasion. Yeah, so it was very memorable. Listening to the radio calls, just flying in as I think the DAX. Obviously, there was the strikes from the hunters and the cameras, the vampires. And then, of course, we flew in DAX with the paratroopers, and then we flew in with our troops as well.
So once you dropped your stick, did you then just go into a fire support role, just orbiting the target area?
The only fire support were the KCARs. There were 10 of us. I wasn't one of them. Hannes, yeah. So we must have come back to. I'm not sure. Yeah, we must have come back to the admin area, and we were just called in as required. Yeah, it was. I don't remember really a lot of activity other than that. We may have gone back to recover troops at some stage. But yeah, I think a lot of the most intense activity was obviously handled by the KCARs and Lynxes, no doubt. Yeah, once the troops were on the ground and doing their job.
Were you down at? Did you do Fire Force from Grand Reef as well?
Yes, yeah. We were that Fire Force was really the one that was deployed. That was a whole year previously. The one that went up to Matassa for the Hill 31 event. But yeah, we operated quite a few times out of Grand Reef. We just moved around, going through my logbooks. A lot of activity, activity out of Darwin and Motoko for the first part of 1977. We did quite a bit of work with the SAS. I think there was the Cockle Shell Heroes. We were involved with them at some stage between. They were about late January of 77 through to about end of April. So we were involved there. Certainly taking in the SAS and then bringing out, I forget which one it was, Cockle Shell Heroes 2 or 3. But we brought out Graham Wilson and a whole bunch of his colleagues. Must have brought them out to Musingedza before they were flown out, I think, by the DAC. Yeah, that was a very vivid recall doing that one. And then, yeah, and a lot of externals out of Motoko to the northeast there. A couple of memorable ones come to mind with, I think Kevin Pinky was leading us. Sadly, Kevin later lost his life at the Canberra in late 79, but we were doing an external. We had Charlie Paxton, Group Captain Charles Paxton, in the Lynx, and we had a coded. They kept radio comms to obviously a minimum, and there was just a code as we went past the various waypoints to do whatever we were going to do. And poor old Charles Paxton's mic got stuck, so he was as frustrated as hell with lots of expletives and swearing, trying to work out what was happening. But yeah, that era was a very busy time with externals till the middle of the year, and then we must have moved on down to Grand Reef and perhaps 7 later in the year.
Nick, just tell us a bit about that Cabora Bassa op from an airman's point of view, what the SAS were doing on Cabora Bassa at the time. And quite an interesting operation, that.
Yes, it was. Yeah, I read a little bit in that book of Barbara Cole's, The Elite. Yeah, I think initially obviously they were trying to, I guess, hit lines of supply between the Zanda camps inside Mozambique and coming into Zimbabwe and trying to obviously stop them from coming in. I mean, Rhodesia, beg your pardon. But Yeah, so the first one, they obviously went around the lake doing a lot of damage here and there. And the subsequent ones, there's not a lot of detail in the books, but what I remember, they were just going around causing whatever damage they could and disrupting movement of terrorists and supplies and so on along those roads south of Kabura. We must have dropped one lot of SAS off at some stage and then recovered, as I said, possibly the last lot, which was Graham Wilson and his team.
Yeah, they were actually living on the lake with their clippers and yeah, just hitting targets at various times. And I think they were out there for several months. I think it was quite an amazing operation, that one. Yeah.
Yes, it was. Yeah, I remember. I remember that well. It was certainly the last part that we were involved
Nick, what was the? Were you shot down at all? Or did you come close to being shot down?
in. Yeah, it was actually just before the Hill 31 event. I'd gone off to do a Kazovac or do something along the Pungwe River north of Ruda, where Peter Brown was based. And late in the afternoon, which we knew was always a vulnerable time, as I was returning along the road that ran along the Pungwe River just as it came out of the high ground. There was a little ridge, and as we passed over that ridge before you came out into the open valley area, yeah, we were fired upon and took quite a number of hits. If I recall correctly, about 11 hits along the front, the middle of the chopper. Luckily, neither of us were hurt. I got a small graze on my face. And yeah, then the chopper definitely had taken some damage. The oil cooler had been hit, so we were losing oil, and one of the blades I think had been hit. So I chose to just put it down, just to the side of the Ruda Air Base before we had any difficulties. Yeah, otherwise both of us were fine. Yeah.
Nick, you did towards the end. You were involved with the SAS in Mozambique when they were working with Renamo. Just tell us a little bit about those events.
Yeah, it's almost a sort of a forgotten, I guess, chapter of their story. Yeah, late January of 80, shortly before the elections, I was at Salisbury and just finished my conversion onto the 205, and I was tasked to go down to Grand Reef with another A Squadron colleague, Richard Skinner, and one of our techs, the Lopez. And yeah, we were just told to go down there and we'd be given a task. We met up with Bob McKenzie, the late Bob McKenzie, and he said, yeah, we've got to go and recover the remaining SAS troops up there on Gorongosa. Yeah, he wasn't sure particularly how the Renamo guys would react. So we had a plan to leave our rotors running, albeit at idle, in case there was a bit of a negative reaction. But the next day we launched with him, and it turned out to be quite a busy day. I can't recall what else we must have done, but certainly when we got there, there was absolutely no antipathy or anything from Renamo. In fact, they were very friendly. But we stayed on our choppers as agreed. Recovered the SAS guys, and then flew back. Checking my logbook, it was quite a long day of about 5 or 6 hours of trooping. So I can't really remember how come it was. How many troops we took off Gorongosa. I only remember there going once. But yeah, I think it was sort of a forgotten chapter and almost closed the door on all the Rhodesian operations. Transporter at that point, probably.
Yeah, I think that really was the final chapter in the war when you recovered those chaps from Mozambique. That was really the end of it. Nick, did you go into central Mozambique on the SAAF down there at all with the SAS operators down in that part of Mozambique?
No, I didn't, Hannes. Yeah, I'd actually in April of or March of '78, I actually got posted to 6 Squadron to become a flying instructor, and so I didn't return to 7 until about August of 79. Did a limited amount of operational work, and then was assigned to do a chopper instructor course. So I didn't get involved, unfortunately, in any of that activity at all. Then I was posted onto H Squadron at the end of the year, but I wasn't involved in any of those ops.
Nick, ops into Zambia, were you involved in any of those? Makushi?
No, Hannes, again, timing. So missed all of that heavy activity, 78 into 79.
So Nick, the war ends. You stayed in the Zimbabwe Air Force for a little while.
Yes, I think a lot of guys were obviously challenged by the decisions they needed to make for themselves, and I chose to hang on for a while and see how things worked out. So stayed on 7 Squadron, or now 8 Squadron, I beg your pardon, and was there until July, August of 81. By which time 7 and 8 had actually amalgamated into one squadron under ep173, who had been the last operational or last Rhodesian squadron commander of 7 Squadron.
And then
from there I went down.
You went and joined the South African Air Force.
Not quite then, Hannes. So in August of 81, I went down to Thornhill again to join 6 Squadron. And then I took over from Steve Baldwin as officer commanding in January of 82. And then now the Hawk ferry, the country had committed itself to buying 8 Hawks. Hugh Slatter had led a team over to overseas, I think, to England, France, and to do selection for replacement of the Vampire. They chose the Hawk, and so the team had to go across in May, I think it was, of 82 to fetch the aircraft, and I was luckily one of the team that went across. So we brought back the Hawks in July, I think it was, of 82, which was 10 days. We landed just 10 days before that dreadful sabotage that occurred down Thornhill.
So the Hawks were only in the country for how long before they were blown up?
I think about 10 days. Honestly, it was a very short period of time. It was dreadful.
Yeah, I didn't realize it happened that quickly after they arrived.
Yes, I think it was as short as that. There was a wedding going on that night. Roddy from Boyne. He was getting married to Colonel French's daughter. Forget her name offhand, but and Brick Bryson on the Lynxes had come back that night from the area where there was quite a bit of dissident activity, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Chilocho.
Yeah,
he'd come back. He gave a bit of a beat up of the mess. Had a vivid memory of that happening. Anyway, next morning, Brick phones me and says, "Nick, we've been sabotaged." Yeah, early in the morning the next day he phoned, and I obviously came rushing in to be greeted by a scene of chaos and destruction. It was really, very, very unpleasant. Yeah.
And you weren't in the firing line when it came to arresting officers or anything?
No, luckily not. Obviously it was a very uncomfortable period of time. What I do recall is that the local CID, they got involved in the investigation, and the Air Force set up a board of inquiry. Crew Captain Phil Pyle, he led that and came down to Thornhill, but it quickly became politicized. And as you know, Phil was one of the unfortunate individuals who got caught up in that, together with Hugh Slatter and Peter Briscoe, amongst others.
Yeah.
And then I think we were grounded almost at that point. And I was sent down to White Ridge, as were others, to different ports. I think Charlie Connolly may have been assigned to Bulawayo Airport, Chris Dickinson to Charles Prince, but we were sent off to go and, on behalf of CID, check for any Air Force guys that were maybe passing through the White Ridge border post in my case, and then just ask them where they were on that night. Not that we believed any of them were involved, of course, but it was just a process that occurred in the immediate aftermath of the sabotage.
Must have been a very, very difficult time for you guys, Nick. So soon after that, you handed in your resignation and you left and went south.
Understood. Actually, there was a freeze on resignations because of what had happened. So I didn't leave until the next year, May of '83, in actual fact. Yeah. And obviously there was probably quite a few of us that left at that time. And that's why I joined the SAAF in July of 1983.
And just tell us a bit about your time in the South African Air Force, Nick.
Well, I wasn't keen to go back into chopper work. I think we'd seen enough of it in Rhodesia. And I was a current flying instructor, so I got offered a post down to Longabonde to join the 83, what was then I think still Flight Training School, FTS Longabonde, but soon became 83 Jet Flying School, and go and train on Mackies there, or Impalas as a SAAF called them. Yeah. I'd already done some training in Durban in '79 with one of our PTCs, 32 PTC. So I wasn't current, but I certainly had done training in Impala. So yeah, luckily I got a slot there. Already a couple of ex-Rhodesians had one ahead of me. One of whom was Tony Oakley, who'd been on one squadron. So so we joined up with people like him at Longabonde.
So that was an instruction posting. You didn't go operate on the Impalas.
I trained there as a flying instructor and was there for four years. I think it was till September of '87. Very satisfying time at Longabonde. It was a very pleasant base, and married patch on base, and everything was right there. So it was a nice, comfortable environment and very enjoyable instruction. There was a lot of the cadets.
Sorry, Nick.
Sorry. Yeah, I beg your pardon. Yeah, I think if I recall correctly, most of the cadets that had joined and had done their training up at Denota on the Harvard were sent down to Longabonde. And then after that, they were streamed onto different units once they finished at Longabonde. Yeah.
Was Bob Rogers the Air Force commander when you were there? Or was that after him?
No. General if I remember correctly, was the general in charge. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And you enjoyed the South African Air Force, Nick?
Yeah, immensely, Hannes. Yeah, it was great. It was undergoing quite a bit of change as it reorganized itself to adapt to new. They were being challenged, or South Africa was being challenged up in southwest, come Angola. So obviously they were gearing themselves up, reorganizing themselves to match that. And particularly the Impala units, they had a lot of, I think, other Rhodesians that come to mind, Mozzie Mostert, Mark Fenner, a couple. They came down, John Sinclair, and they moved on to different Impala units, which obviously had single seat, the MB326Ks, and off they went to do their operational tours up in the southwest. There were quite a few ex-Rhodesians who did very well up there. Yeah.
Nick, you didn't fly Mirages?
I didn't know. And once I finished my tour at Longabonde, I did a flight leaders course up at Petersburg prior to going on to fly Canberras. So I joined the 12 Squadron, as it was known, in January of 1988. Yeah.
And then, Nick, after the South African Air Force?
Well, I stayed on 12 for a while. Sadly, I lost my medical as a result of a vehicle accident. I got hit by a truck outside Waterkloof Base. So I finished with the squadron and then did about a year's staff officer duties in South African Air Force HQ. In a very fulfilling post, staff officer fighter bomber, looking after the strike squadrons of the Air Force. And then I left in March of '90 to go back to Zim. I went back to farm, and ended up in the commercial world for a while. Going back to work for Farmers Co-op, Farmer City Centre as it became.
Okay.
And yeah, once I got over my medical issues, I was able to get back into get my medical back and did a license overseas and joined MK in March of 1997.
Okay. So you would have worked with Chris Dixon. Um, who were the
Yes, yes,
who were the other guys? Mike Thornycroft.
yes, yes. Mike, Chris, Steve Kesby from the Air Force. You know, there were lots of ex-Air Force guys, as time went on, a lot of guys that had come from the general aviation side of aviationism. Yeah, it was a time of great change and growth at MK. Um, I think when I joined, we just lost a DC-8 sadly in December of '96. Then Mike got another one, and we probably had 4 DC-8s by that point in time. And the airline just didn't stop growing, and Mike didn't stop recruiting. Yeah, I think following our course of recruits, he didn't stop for literally ages. As Mike explained, at the DC-8 fleet, and then eventually took on the 747s. Yeah.
Nick, you went to some pretty unusual places in the course of that part of your career. I gather. I used to see quite a lot of old Chris in those days. And my word, you went to some interesting places and you had some interesting tasks.
Yeah, we sure did, Hannes. I think Seven Squadron had a motto. I think it was what was it? Fight anywhere and everywhere, or something along those lines. And it felt like MK was a bit like that, anywhere and everywhere. Literally, we went around the world. A lot of the work was in Africa initially, but progressively as time changed and as the operation got bigger, so literally we went around the world. Um, I did a count a long while back, but I think I'd been to 146 different places around the world. Yeah, both positioning and operating. Yeah, and most countries of Africa.
Yeah.
That would have been the same for just about everybody. Yeah.
Nick,
Yeah.
and then MK went the hard way. Um, how did how did you end up in Australia? Did you fly? Did you go to Australia to work, or did you?
I did, Hannes. Eventually, yeah. It wasn't sadly, when MK failed in April, I think it was early April of 2010. Um, a lot of us joined Air Atlanta, which was a similar operation, but Icelandic owned. There were a couple of brothers who owned it, and they had a similar kind of operation, albeit with they had a cargo operation flying classic 747s, but they also had a dedicated operation out of Saudi, whereby they would fly the Muslim pilgrims in and out of Saudi, particularly into either Jeddah or Riyadh, Medina, which of course is the burial place of Prophet Muhammad. So we would literally fly to all the various countries in the Muslim world and fly in or fly out the pilgrims as they came with the two main uh, periods of their pilgrimage movements. Yeah, so I did that for 2 years, and then a job came up here in Australia at Flight Training Adelaide. Another ex-Rhodesian and Afro-Air pilot, Tony Norton, was here, and he put the word out. So I put my hand up, and I was luckily enough, I'd had my PR ready for Australia. I've been very fortunate to get it. Yeah, so 2012, end of June 2012, I arrived here and have been here ever since.
And you're still instructing, Nick?
Yes, honestly, look, our section that we work in is called Airline Transition Training. Flight Training Adelaide is probably the biggest flying school in Australia. In fact, it must be now two bases, one up at Toowoomba in Queensland, but the original one has always been here in Adelaide. And a lot of our work is training young pilots or cadets up ready for their airlines. So one of our main customers has been Cathay Pacific, who has come back now after COVID. So we would get their youngsters do all their flying training here in Australia, which would take about the better part of a year. And then they would come to the simulator section where we would train them in multi-crew cooperation skills in very suitable devices that represent an airline cockpit, and get them to work together as a team using their airline procedures and preparing them for their type ratings for their airline. So hence the name of the section, Airline Transition Training. All the crew with us, all the instructors are just about everyone is ex-airline. So they bring a huge amount of experience. And the youngsters, to snap it up, they really enjoy that sort of nurturing and guidance that we're able to offer towards their, preparing them for their type ratings. I continue to do that now, as well as look after the section here at Adelaide.
Nick, last question. How many hours have you got?
And it's about 12,500, not a lot. That gap where I didn't fly for a while, 6 years or 7 years, whatever it was, meant that I obviously didn't end up with the amount of hours that most crew seem to retire with about 20 to 25,000. But still a very decent amount of flying, and 7,000 hours on airline ops, about 3.5 each on the DC-8 and 7.4, and memorable times on those aeroplanes, particularly the 7.4, which was a great aeroplane to fly and operate.
Well, Nick, I think Australia's very lucky to have guys like you there. I think Australia's done well out of our old country. They've got some great people moved over there, and I'm sure they've made a hell of a meaningful contribution to the country. But sorry you're so far away. But thanks for your time, Nick. I really appreciate it, and I'm pleased we managed to get this on the record.
Yeah, thanks, Hannes. Thank you very much for asking me. I know that between John and yourself, you've contributed enormously to trapping a lot of the history of the Rhodesian Armed Forces operational days. Some hugely valiant efforts from many people. But thank you for that effort, and I think it's been a wonderful contribution that the both of you have made towards sort of harnessing that history and keeping it there. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Much appreciated. We'll be in touch.
Yeah. All right, fellas. Thank you.